Someone in your life is quietly wrestling with a decision about you right now, and I want you to really absorb what I'm about to explain, because this may be unfolding in someone's mind at this very second, hidden and private, and you might have no idea it's even happening. There is a person out there whose thoughts return to you far more often and far more powerfully than they would ever admit out loud. You might feel like things between you are murky, distant, or unresolved. On the surface, everything seems quiet and undefined, but underneath that stillness, this person is standing at one of the heaviest emotional forks in their life. And what they're facing isn't some small throwaway choice. It isn't sudden or careless. It's a decision that centers entirely on you, not the photos you post, not the texts you've exchanged, not the memories sitting in the past, but you as a soul, as a presence, as someone whose entrance into their life actually mattered and left consequences behind. They're wrestling with something profound. Do I move closer or do I pull away? Do I choose this person or do I choose my own fear? Do I hold on or do I release it? And this isn't a choice they can rush, ignore, or bury, because you were never just another footnote in their story. You're a chapter they can't close without first being honest with themselves. Right now, this person is fighting a battle nobody else can see. On the outside, they might look completely normal, going to work, laughing with friends, functioning like everything's fine, maybe even acting like they've moved on entirely. But internally, something very different is happening. Thoughts of you show up uninvited, in moments they never planned for, late at night, early before the day starts, in those quiet, in-between seconds when distraction fades. And in those moments, they're asking themselves hard questions. What if this decision reshapes my whole future? What if choosing them means I have to become someone different than who I am now? What if I lose them for good if I don't act? What if I finally act and fail all over again? Here's something most people never quite grasp. Silence isn't proof that feelings are absent. Often, silence is exactly where fear lives. Some people stay quiet, not because they don't care, but because they're terrified of losing control. Some avoid love altogether because nobody ever taught them how to feel safe inside it. Some hesitate not from indifference, but because caring itself feels like a risk. Carl Jung once put it simply, wherever your fear resides, that's exactly where your work is waiting. And you represent a task this person can't keep avoiding forever. Their heart keeps pulling them back toward you. It remembers what it felt like to be truly seen by you, to be understood without having to explain everything, to feel calm in a world that almost never slows down. Their heart still holds onto the version of themselves that existed whenever you were around, but their mind keeps pushing back. It drags up old wounds, past letdowns, previous failures. It whispers warnings, telling them not to walk into the same pain twice. It questions whether they're healed enough, strong enough, worthy enough to try again. This is the exact tension they're living inside right now, caught between healing and hope, between staying safe and taking a risk, between remaining who they've always been and becoming someone bigger. And you sit right at the center of that tug of war. Here's the thing. Not every connection leaves a lasting imprint. Not every person who enters your life actually rearranges something inside you. Most connections are brief. Most are distractions. Most are lessons that pass through quickly and disappear. But something with you went deeper than that. You didn't just draw their attention, you activated something in them. You touched on their insecurities without ever attacking them for having those insecurities. You pushed against their comfort zone without ever forcing your way in. You reflected back parts of themselves they hadn't fully faced yet. You stirred up both their longing and their fear at the same time. That's exactly why this decision weighs on them so heavily, because choosing you means growth, and growth always threatens the ego's comfortable little bubble. Jung also said that the true privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you actually are. And the truth is, without even trying, you quietly pointed them toward that exact path. They felt it. Even if they never had the words to describe it, even if they couldn't quite articulate what was happening, but around you, something inside them shifted. They felt more present, more honest, more exposed, more real than they usually allow themselves to feel. And that kind of connection doesn't just vanish because texting slows down or circumstances change. That's why they haven't forgotten you. That's why hearing your name still causes something to stir inside them. That's why the thought of permanently losing you creates a tightness in their chest they can't fully explain. You weren't background noise in their life. You were meaning. You weren't entertainment. You were comfort. You weren't a passing distraction. You were direction. And when someone runs into that kind of impact, they're forced to look inward and confront themselves. Jung had another idea that applies perfectly here. Until something unconscious becomes conscious, it will keep steering your life while you mistake it for fate. Right now, this person is standing right at the edge of that exact realization. They're starting to understand that avoiding you isn't neutral, that choosing to do nothing is still a choice with real weight, that indecision carries consequences just like any other decision does. They know that staying silent for too long could cost them you entirely. They know someone else might recognize your worth without a moment of hesitation. They know that what they were slow to appreciate might not stick around forever waiting for them. At the same time, they're afraid of getting hurt all over again. Old experiences from their past still echo loudly in their head. This hesitation isn't always really about you. Often it's about ghosts from long before you ever showed up. And there's another fear they may never say out loud, the fear that they simply aren't enough for you. Deep, real love has a way of exposing every insecurity a person carries. When someone senses they have something genuinely valuable to lose, their self-doubt spikes. They start wondering whether they can actually meet the emotional bar this connection requires of them. That's exactly where they're standing right now, questioning themselves, measuring themselves, wondering if they can rise to match the bond they felt with you. And whether they choose courage or retreat is what will shape everything that comes next. This decision is forming quietly, invisibly, somewhere deep inside them. And while they're deliberating, something else important is happening. Something you need to understand fully. Your energy matters right now. How you're carrying yourself, how much you're respecting yourself, how firmly you're choosing yourself in this moment, all of it matters. Because sometimes the exact moment someone finally chooses you is the same moment you stop waiting around to be chosen at all. As Jung noted, whatever you resist tends to persist, and whatever you accept has the power to transform. The most powerful transformation of all begins the instant you stop putting your entire life on pause for somebody else's confusion. This is where your part in this story truly starts to matter. This is where the shift becomes quiet but incredibly powerful, because while they're stuck debating, circling the same thoughts over and over, something inside them is already changing anyway. Awareness has been switched on, and once that happens, there's no going back to the old blindness. They begin replaying moments with you, not dramatically, but in small, quiet flashes. The way you listened instead of jumping straight to fixing things. The way you gave them space instead of demanding instant answers. The way you made them feel accepted without ever trying to possess them. These memories surface unexpectedly, often at the worst possible times for them. And every single time, the same realization hits again. This connection was never accidental. They're starting to understand that what unsettles them isn't actually you, it's what you represent. You represent emotional honesty, you represent real depth, you represent a mirror that shows them exactly who they are and who they could become if they let themselves grow. And mirrors are deeply uncomfortable for anyone still negotiating with their own shadow side. Jung once observed that people will do almost anything, no matter how ridiculous, to avoid facing their own soul. And right now, this person is standing face to face with theirs. That's exactly why they keep flip-flopping. One moment they feel drawn toward you, picturing what it would be like to finally step up, speak honestly, and choose courage. The next moment they pull back, convincing themselves that distance feels safer, that silence feels like control, that time alone will somehow untangle what they're refusing to actually face. But time doesn't erase meaningful connections, it only makes them clearer. They're starting to notice how different life feels without you around. Not necessarily empty, but flatter somehow, less vivid, less alive than before, and that contrast is exactly what makes this decision impossible to keep avoiding. You didn't just take up space in their life, you changed their internal world, and that change doesn't just fade away on its own. At this stage, another internal conflict starts surfacing: responsibility. They begin asking themselves questions that go beyond simple desire. Can I actually show up consistently? Can I be emotionally available and not just emotionally curious? Can I protect this connection instead of sabotaging it the second fear shows up? Can I love someone without hiding parts of myself? These questions feel heavy because they demand real maturity. Choosing you would mean no half-effort, no ambiguity, no emotional shortcuts, and they can sense that with total clarity. They know you're not someone who thrives in uncertainty. They can feel that you weren't built for games or endless waiting rooms, and that awareness creates real pressure, because choosing you ultimately means choosing integrity. This is where a lot of people hesitate the hardest, not because they don't care, but precisely because they do. Deep down, they understand that fully entering your life would require them to actually evolve, and evolution always demands accountability. Jung expressed this same truth plainly. There is no path to consciousness without pain. Growth is uncomfortable. Love that actually transforms you is uncomfortable, and they're standing right at the edge of that discomfort right now. They can also sense something else, that you're changing too. Even if you haven't said a word about it, even if you haven't made any announcement, they can feel a shift in your energy. Less chasing, less over-explaining, less reaching into silence hoping for a response. More grounded, more centered, more self-directed. And this unsettles them, because when someone stops chasing, the illusion of control disappears completely. When someone stops waiting, reality sets in hard. They start realizing that you aren't frozen in place, waiting for them, that your life keeps moving forward regardless, that your worth was never going to pause just because they couldn't decide. This realization can spark real urgency. They start imagining scenarios they didn't want to picture before: you meeting somebody new, you choosing peace over longing, you quietly closing the door without any drama or confrontation at all, and that thought does something to them. It exposes attachment, not a possessive kind, but a genuinely vulnerable kind, the kind that admits, this actually mattered to me more than I ever let myself feel. This is also when fear intensifies. Fear of rejection, fear of being seen too clearly, fear of failing you, fear of reopening old wounds. Sometimes, instead of moving forward, people simply freeze. They tell themselves that staying still is neutral. But stillness, rooted in fear, is its own quiet form of avoidance. And yet, even inside that avoidance, the decision keeps forming anyway, because every single day, they don't choose courage. They feel the cost of it. A subtle regret, a quiet tension, a sense that something important keeps getting postponed. They're starting to realize that not choosing is itself still a choice. And here's the paradox they're caught inside. If they choose you, they risk real pain. If they don't, they risk regret. And regret tends to linger far longer than heartbreak ever does. Heartbreak eventually heals. Regret festers and spreads. That's exactly why your presence still occupies so much space in their inner world. That's why they can't simply replace you with someone else. That's why distractions don't work the way they used to for them anymore. That's why silence doesn't bring them peace, only more delay. They're learning something important about themselves through this whole experience with you, that avoiding vulnerability no longer feels satisfying. That emotional safety without any real depth feels hollow. That comfort without genuine connection feels empty. And even when they try to rationalize their own hesitation, the same truth keeps resurfacing anyway. This connection asked something real of them. And the question isn't, do I feel something anymore? The real question has become, do I actually have the courage to honor what I feel? Meanwhile, your role in all of this stays exactly the same. You're not required to convince anyone of anything. You're not required to prove your worth. You're not required to sit around waiting in uncertainty. Your power comes from alignment, from choosing your own growth, your own peace, your own direction, regardless of what they decide. Because whether they step forward now, later, or never, the most important movement happening in this whole story is the one happening inside you. And this is exactly where the balance tips, because when you fully choose yourself, you stop negotiating your own worth. And once your worth stops being negotiable, clarity speeds up fast. Either they rise up to meet you, or they step aside, and both outcomes actually serve your growth either way. As Jung said, whoever looks outward dreams, and whoever looks inward wakes up. Right now, both of you are being invited to wake up. And whatever happens next in this story depends entirely on who actually answers that invitation. This is where the tension climbs to an even deeper level, because now it's no longer simply an emotional decision, it's become a decision about identity itself. They're starting to sense that choosing you isn't only about choosing a relationship. It's about choosing an entirely different way of existing, a different standard, a different version of who they are. And that realization can feel genuinely intimidating. Some people are perfectly comfortable with longing, but deeply uncomfortable with actual responsibility. They enjoy the feeling of connection, but fear the structure that real commitment brings with it. And when a bond feels as meaningful as the one they felt with you, it demands something real in return. This is usually when self-sabotage sneaks in. They might tell themselves they need more time. They might convince themselves the circumstances just aren't right yet. They might suddenly focus on flaws that never bothered them before. They might withdraw emotionally while telling themselves they're just being rational about it. But underneath all of that sits one truth they struggle to admit. They're afraid of failing at something that genuinely matters. When something doesn't matter much, failure feels tolerable. But when something touches your core, failure starts to feel like a verdict on who you actually are. And you touch their core, which makes them wonder if they're even capable of being what this connection actually requires. Not just passion, but real presence. Not just affection, but consistency. Not just attraction, but genuine emotional reliability. That's exactly why they hesitate. Because choosing you means they can no longer hide behind ambiguity. They can't keep blaming timing, distance, or confusion for their own indecision. They'd have to actually show up as themselves, fully visible, fully accountable for their choices. And that level of exposure terrifies anyone who's learned to survive by protecting themselves emotionally. At the same time, something else is happening inside them too. They're beginning to notice your strength. Not loud strength, not performative strength. Quiet, grounded strength instead. They notice that you're not falling apart in their absence. They notice that you're not chasing after validation from them. They notice that your energy feels like it's stabilizing rather than spiraling out of control. And that realization creates a subtle but real shift in power, because desire actually thrives on distance when that distance carries dignity. You're no longer trying to convince them of your value, you're simply embodying it instead. And when value gets embodied like that, it becomes undeniable to anyone paying attention. This is where their longing deepens even further. They start missing not just your presence, but the specific way they felt whenever they were around you, the emotional clarity, the sense of calm, the feeling of being understood without being interrogated about it. They start comparing other interactions to the connection they shared with you, even without consciously meaning to. And nothing quite measures up, not because you were flawless, but because that bond was genuinely authentic. Authenticity leaves a residue behind. It lingers in the nervous system. It lingers in memory. It lingers in contrast against everything else. They're starting to realize that replacing you isn't the same thing as actually resolving what they felt for you. And unresolved connections have a habit of resurfacing again and again until they're finally faced with honesty. This is also when the fear of loss starts feeling much more tangible. The idea of you moving on stops feeling like some distant hypothetical. It starts feeling genuinely real. They picture you choosing peace, choosing your own growth, choosing someone who doesn't hesitate the way they did. And that image stirs up something sharp and uncomfortable inside them. Not jealousy exactly, and not possessiveness. Regret. Regret over not acting when they had the chance. Regret over letting fear dictate a decision that actually required courage. Regret over confusing safety with simply staying stuck. And regret is an incredibly powerful motivator. Around this point, their internal dialogue starts to shift. The questions become more direct and harder to dodge. What if I let something genuinely rare slip right through my fingers? What if this was my chance to grow and I let fear talk me out of it? What if my own fear ends up costing me something I'll never find again? This is when real clarity starts forming, even if it happens slowly, because meaningful connections force people to finally confront their own patterns, and you exposed patterns they could no longer keep ignoring: avoidance, emotional withholding, self-doubt dressed up as logic. They're seeing themselves far more clearly now, and clarity has a way of removing every excuse they've been leaning on. Meanwhile, you're being guided towards something important as well. Patience doesn't mean abandoning yourself. Love doesn't require erasing yourself. Understanding doesn't mean tolerating uncertainty forever without limit. Your job isn't to sit in suspended animation waiting. Your job is to stay aligned with your own truth, to keep building a life that feels full, grounded, and self-respecting on its own terms. Because when someone senses they might lose access to you, not because you're angry, but because you're actually evolving, the decision suddenly sharpens. They feel that shift clearly. They feel that you're no longer available for emotional limbo, that your energy has stopped circling around their indecision, that you're choosing clarity for yourself, even while the outside situation stays unresolved. This is when people are forced to decide, not out of fear of loneliness, but out of genuine recognition of value. Either they step forward with real intention, or they step back and let the connection close with some dignity intact. There's no lasting middle ground here, and this is exactly where destiny responds, not as punishment and not as a reward either, but simply as alignment. Because connections meant to grow will always find their way through honesty and courage, and connections meant only to teach a lesson will release once growth gets resisted for too long. Both outcomes carry real meaning. Both outcomes serve your evolution either way. Right now, momentum is building quietly, internally, invisibly beneath the surface. And soon enough, something will shift on the outside too. A message, a confession, a decision, or a silence that finally speaks with total clarity. Until that happens, the most powerful thing you can do is stay anchored firmly in your own worth. Because the second you stop negotiating your value, life itself stops negotiating your outcomes. And now the pressure shifts once more, because when a decision gets delayed long enough, life eventually starts answering on its own terms. They begin noticing signs they simply can't ignore anymore: emotional restlessness, sudden waves of nostalgia, a pull toward honesty that feels both urgent and frightening at the same time. It's as if something deep inside them is insisting this cannot stay unresolved forever. They might try distracting themselves, burying it in work, routines, other people, constant noise, but distraction stops working the way it used to, because the question hasn't gone anywhere. It's simply matured. What exactly am I avoiding? And why does avoiding it feel heavier than actually facing it head-on? This is when they start understanding something uncomfortable, that their indecision isn't protecting them at all, it's draining them slowly. The emotional weight they've been carrying doesn't lift through silence. It grows heavier instead. They start recognizing patterns in themselves, how they retreat the moment things start feeling real, how they intellectualize their feelings instead of actually expressing them, how they delay choices that require any real vulnerability. And with that recognition comes a quiet, unavoidable realization: if I don't break this pattern, I'll just keep repeating it, not only with you, but throughout my entire life. They start asking themselves deeper questions now. Not about you specifically, but about who they're actually becoming as a person. Am I living from fear or from truth? Am I choosing comfort or integrity? Am I avoiding pain, or am I actually avoiding growth itself? And these particular questions don't leave much room for a neutral answer. At the same time, they can sense something else clearly too. You're not waiting the way you used to anymore, not because you stopped caring, but because you started honoring yourself instead. Your energy has shifted from anticipation into alignment, from hoping into becoming, from watching into actually moving forward. And this completely changes the emotional atmosphere between you. When someone realizes they can no longer access you passively, urgency shows up fast. When someone senses that you're fully choosing your own life, the illusion of unlimited time collapses instantly. They feel all of that. They feel that if they want you in their life, it can't happen through hesitation anymore. It can't happen through half measures or emotional vagueness. It would need to be real, and reality tends to be confronting. This is when the internal resistance either finally breaks or hardens completely. Some people, faced with this exact moment, choose courage. They step forward despite their fear. They speak honestly despite the uncertainty. They accept the risk of vulnerability because they recognize the real cost of continued avoidance. Others retreat instead, not because they don't feel anything, but because they simply aren't ready to transform yet, and transformation can never be forced onto someone. Either way, the truth eventually surfaces because connections that demand evolution won't tolerate permanent stagnation. Meanwhile, something important keeps happening within you as well. You're no longer defining yourself through their decision. You're reclaiming your own center, your own peace, your own direction. You're remembering that love isn't something you earn by sitting around waiting for it. It's something you allow into your life by staying aligned with yourself first. And this internal shift is genuinely powerful because the moment you stop shrinking your own life to accommodate somebody else's confusion, clarity speeds up dramatically. The fog lifts. The emotional weight lightens considerably. You stop trying to decode every sign and start actually trusting yourself instead. This is when the outcome finally starts crystallizing, not because you forced anything, but because you stopped resisting your own growth. And whatever decision they make next will be shaped entirely by this new reality you've created for yourself. Real love ultimately demands clarity, not endless uncertainty. Whether someone chooses to step toward you or walk away, their decision reveals their truth, not your worth. If they choose you, their actions will be consistent, intentional, and emotionally available, leaving no room for confusion. If they leave, their absence will provide the closure needed to move forward. Sometimes distance is not rejection, but an opportunity for growth and future alignment. The most important lesson, however, is that your life should never be placed on hold while waiting for someone else's decision. True strength comes from choosing yourself, grounding your identity in self-respect rather than external validation. When you value yourself first, love becomes a healthy partnership instead of a desperate pursuit. Your worth has never depended on being chosen by another person. Genuine love is built on mutual commitment, emotional honesty, and shared growth, and the right person will choose you freely and clearly. In the end, the greatest transformation is not whether they choose you, but whether you choose yourself, because that decision brings lasting peace, freedom, and the confidence to move forward with dignity regardless of the outcome.